Hey Grandmasters, it's Mike from the WCA taking a look at the week 2 video. We had a lot of kids playing the notated games from the same opening, which is pretty common at the scholastic level. Try to remember that we're coaching kids under 1200 in these sections, so when you're playing or facing a player with that rating, you have to be prepared for some tricks. So let's take a look at the basis of this opening, why so many kids play it, the good parts of it, the bad parts of it, etc. And so from bishop to c4, let's first take a look at why that's a good move for white. It's pretty obvious. If you look at the top diagonal, it's putting pressure on f7, which is the famous square for checkmating somebody quickly. And number two, if you look at the bottom right-hand screen, you'll see the white king is already set to castle. So for a young chess player, what can be better than having your pieces out quickly and your king safe? But let's take another look at something like this, which is the part of the 4-move checkmate. And you'll see with the queen on h5 and the bishop on c4 pointing at the same square. So the placement of the bishop is really, really good for white. So a player with the black pieces has to be very, very careful about where to put that piece. So why bishop c4 anyway? Let's take a look at one move earlier. It's white's turn. I highlighted the diagonal for you, showing that white has 5 choices in this position. And let's go through them one by one. We already looked at bishop c4, which will be the focus of this video, but bishop e2 is a possibility. But here at the WCA, we don't recommend our students playing moves like this because the bishop is too passive on e2. Is it playable? Of course, there are grandmasters who have put their bishops there, but it really doesn't put pressure on black at all. It doesn't pressure the pawn on f7. It doesn't attack a knight. It's basically giving the king a chance to castle and laying back a little too much. The next square on the diagonal is bishop to d3, another move that we don't recommend that you play. Here for several reasons. One, if you look at the bishop, it's kind of comical. It almost looks like a big pawn because it's looking right into the back of the pawn on e4 and not really giving itself a chance to participate in the game. But the problems go a little deeper than that. If I play a natural developing move for black, say for example knight f6, I highlighted the square d2. That's one of your center pawns. As a WCA student with a rating under 1200, you really need to be using those pawns. Because remember from the lectures, those center pawns do lots of work for your team. They not only let bishops out, but they guard very, very important squares in the center. They can open lines in the middle. So if you block that pawn with your bishop, you're going to have some problems playing the opening. Now, of course, we have students who say, well, why can't I play a move like pawn to b3 to get the bishop out that way? You can. But, you know, black is not under much pressure after this move, and believe it or not, there's a little trick they can play. They could even try a move like knight takes e4, which looks a bit bizarre because it's losing a piece, but it's really not. So when you take that, now they strike with pawn to d5, and take a quick look, and you're going to see that bishop is going to run out of squares pretty quickly. So after bishop to d3, now pawn e4, black is not only pushing, but they're going to get their piece back, and the position for black is more than comfortable. So that leaves us with the next move on that diagonal for white, which would be bishop to b5. This is probably the most popular amongst all chess players because the bishop on b5 is not only attacking a piece, it's putting more pressure on e5 in the center, because if that knight is ever captured, the pawn on e5 could fall in some variations. This is known as the Ruy-Lopez, one of the most heavily analyzed openings in chess. So clearly that's another terrific choice for white. The last one on the diagonal is obviously something you're not going to play as a chess player. You're going to lose a piece in one move, but I want to share something funny with you quickly. I had a kindergarten girl who played this move for a reason. She said she did it to make a seesaw. Now, of course, you know, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to teach this young lady how to play chess if she's thinking about seesaws? But let me show you what she meant. She saw a seesaw. Look at the two bishops looking at each other, and they're kind of bouncing around as if they were on an actual seesaw. This 5-year-old girl actually turned out to be a pretty good chess player. Chess is a game of pattern recognition, so not bad for a 5-year-old to see the seesaw. However, I wouldn't recommend you play it in a real chess game for obvious reasons. All right, Grandmasters. So now let's take a look at the most common move, as we talked about, which is bishop to c4. And that leaves black's bishop with the same possibilities that we talked about for white. And let's go through them quickly one by one. Bishop e7, passive. Playable, actually known as the Hungarian defense. It's a real move. It develops a piece. The king is one step closer to castling, but for our purposes in class, we would prefer that you get more active with the bishop. Bishop to d6, you're going to run into the same problems that you ran into with white blocking the center pawn. Bishop to b4 in this position is a mistake. You're not attacking the knight, and white will probably hit you with c3, a move that they most likely want to play anyway. So that would leave you with bishop a3, and again, if you have a 5-year-old in the audience who wants to play on the seesaw, be my guest, but otherwise pretty much a bad move. So bishop to c5 is the move we recommend our students play. Now, after bishop to c5, there are lots of possibilities for both sides, but we always get the question, hey, why not knight f6 instead of bringing the bishop out first? As a matter of fact, knight g5 is the answer that you have to be prepared for. The reason is white, after knight g5, is attacking f7 twice. And this is known in some circles as, it's from the two knights defense, but kids call every variation like this the fried liver attack. It's a bizarre name, but it basically means at the scholastic level when a knight and bishop attack the pawn by your king. It's more than playable for both sides, but if you don't know what you're doing as black, you're going to get in a whole heap of trouble. For example, here, the most common move is d5, keeping the bishop away from your king, but you'd have to know things like, you know, if white takes the pawn, black could take on d5, and then the real fried liver attack is when white sacrifices a knight on f7. And just take a look at what can happen to you. Queen f3 check, your king goes to e6 to defend the knight, a move like knight c3 putting more pressure on that knight. This can be a real problem if you're not comfortable with the theory. So what we recommend is play bishop to c5, and by playing bishop to c5, you don't allow white to put the knight on g5 because of the open diagonal. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, take a look at this for a moment. What if the knight decides I'm going to g5 anyway? Well, the problem with that move is pretty clear. You can just take it. But the tricksters in the group will occasionally try that move. So they give away a whole knight, and then they kind of yawn, or they'll say something like, oh man, I can't believe I lost a piece. And they'll say, oh, let me try to get one back and play a move like d4. Well, you need to keep an eye on that, because d4 attacks your bishop, but more importantly, the bishop on c1 is attacking your queen. Fortunately for black, white is completely lost. You just take the pawn on g2, attacking a rook. Rook moves, and then take that middle pawn with your knight. For example, you have a lot of things you can do here, but you're basically up a whole piece, and you should have no trouble winning this game as black. So when you play bishop to c5, you don't allow white to take that diagonal. So what do? At your level, the most common move is d3, which now protects that square, allowing the knight to come there. Again, I'll show you what happens if the knight goes there in one move. You just take it. After d3, you'll see that the square is covered by the bishop on c1. So you wouldn't have much to worry about in that position. If you play knight f6, for example, after d3, which is the main move for us, now once the knight comes to g5, there isn't the possibility of the fried liver attack because we can simply castle. And by castling, This is leading us to a position that we saw twice this week at the WCA, and it comes up countless times in scholastic games. So here we really want you to pay attention to what can happen in these games. After you castle your king, if white decides to take on f7, and most of the players that you play against will do this, you take back with a rook, bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, and from here you're going to take a look at a position that's very, very good for black. The person with the white pieces, they have a reason. The player has a reason to play this way. Most young people will say, hey, I did it to expose the black king. The problem is, what are you exposing the king to? All of the white pieces are still on the back rank. So you gave up 2 minor pieces for a rook and a pawn. The material is equal, but if you look at black's setup, they already have 3 minor pieces in the game. Not a great deal for white. So let me show you quickly a common continuation. Knight c3. Just get your pieces out with black. Pawn to d6. Castles. And we had a young player, we show this game a lot. We actually showed it to the young group we have this year in week 1. A young guy in first grade actually played this game, played bishop to g4. This chess player is now ready for college, so it was played a number of years ago. And after bishop to g4, white actually tried to block that bishop with his pawn on f3, but that's illegal because the bishop on c5 is pinning. So the queen went to e1, and you can kind of enjoy the finish. Pretty well played for a first grader. When the queen got out of the way of the bishop, black noticed that the pawn on c2 wasn't protected, so they attacked it. Queen had to go back to protect, and from this position, lots of ways to continue, but white just kind of ran into some problems here. d5, trying to open the game. White takes, black takes, and chess is not checkers. There's no forced reason for white to make these exchanges, but the young player did. It was actually a third grader playing white against this first grader. This was at a nationals in Arizona about, about 12 years ago, maybe more. Black took back, and a quick glance at this position, you just see the black pieces have improved so much, and white is still kind of tied up on the back row. So he played pawn to c3 to eliminate the knight. Knight's not going back, though. It came in with a check. King went to h1. And in this position, after knight f4, you have a mate problem on g2. And here, black is not only threatening mate, but again improving the pieces. White had to play f3 here to try to drive that bishop away, but instead defended poorly with g1. And as we always tell the WCA students, your rooks do not belong in boxes, as well as your king. That king on h1 is in a pretty sad state. So a sacrifice, bishop f3, which is not bad for a first grader that he saw this, but white's in big trouble. There's no way to stop the mate at this point. So he just took the bishop, and you have a very simple mate in 2. Queen takes f3, rook g2, queen takes g2, checkmate. So go back, review the video more than once, and make sure you're comfortable with the ideas of the pieces coming out from this position. Why we play bishop c5? Because we don't allow the fried liver attack. And if the kids try to get that fried liver attack by playing d3 first, just remember the sequence of moves. Play knight f6. If the knight comes to g5, simply castle. And for our students with the white pieces, try to remember that going for this trade, knight, rook takes, bishop takes, king takes, is very rarely worth the effort. 2 minor pieces and lots of developing moves to take a rook and a pawn that haven't moved yet. Okay, Grandmasters, hope you enjoyed the video. Work hard, study hard. We'll see you in 2 weeks. No class the week of President's Day, the weekend. Take care.